It's alright.
What's good, YouTube podcast? Today, we're going to have a really dynamic conversation. I have bdougie, or Brian Douglas here, who's a GitHub developer advocate. He's the host of JAMstack Radio. You can catch him on Twitter at bdougie.live. He has a YouTube channel, bdougie. He does open source projects. And something that's very interesting is that he's never done an interview to get a job. And he works for a very large company like GitHub. So, yeah, I'm excited to introduce you all to Brian Douglas. What's good, family?
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me on, Dwan. One clarification, I have interviewed for jobs. I've never submitted a resume. So all my jobs that I've interviewed for, it's always been a warm connection through the content I put out there, the open source work I do, and just basically the networking I do, just to get my next. And it's not even for doing the next thing. It's just really, I just love connecting with people.
Yeah.
I come from sales. As I mentioned, I used to sell Cisco equipment. So like I just leverage that technique and that skill set along with my technical skill set.
Okay, so here's a question. You have never submitted a resume, but you have interviewed for positions. So have you ever been denied a position that you didn't submit a resume for?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I've had quite a few people reach out to me, like name all the FANG companies. I've interviewed for them.
Nice.
And none of them I explicitly went out to go interview for them. They just happened to honestly, like I always tell this new programmers, 6 months into the job, if you're in a major city, you're going to get recruiters reaching out to you. Mm. And one thing I also recommend is every 6 months interview. If you're doing a technical role as an engineer or something adjacent to it, interview, because your best raise is going to be that offer from another company. Whether you decide to take that offer, or you take that offer to your current company and get a raise from that. So that's something that I'll say that publicly, I'll say that privately. Like, this is something I always tell people to do, especially in tech.
You're already dropping jewels.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been doing this for professionally almost 9 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it feels like it's gone fast. But I've learned just by talking to folks, and like tech is a very diverse space, but like also it's a not diverse space.
Right.
So all the folks who have made it because they've been coding since they're 12, or because they went to the University of Illinois and did that program, or MIT, like they're all a cohort of people who share information together. So like, if you think of like, so I don't know what your background, we actually didn't go into too much detail, but like, I was actually chatting with somebody else that I chat who also has a YouTube channel who's based in Kansas City. We talked about hip hop,
right?
And like hip hop has like these different pockets around the U.S.
Yeah. Of
like these cohorts, if you call them, or these groups, because not all of them are part of the group, but like these genres and styles. And like me growing up, I'm born in '86, so I'm a '90s kid. Listened to hip hop in the late '90s, early 2000s.
Right.
Hip hop itself, they all operate in the same like level. Or not the level, but the same cohort. It's the same thing with tech. If you go to the same school, those same people, they're all going to like pull each other up.
Right.
Like we know about the PayPal mafia, Elon Musk, all the other folks that came after that who got rich out of PayPal. It's the same thing. So my job that I've made my job is I need to inject myself in those mafias, those groups. So that way they know who I am. So when I get my next job, it's because they're like, hey, Brian's doing really good stuff. Why don't we just bring him into our circle, and we're going to bring him into this company.
Man, that's a great point. I want to rewind though.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your background. You mentioned that you got a late start when it comes to software development. Can we talk about how you got started with coding and all of that, what drove you to that, and then kind of give people a background on your journey?
Yeah. So my start of the background, like I've come from like a broken home, single parent house. Like my dad, I know my dad, he's still around in my life, but he's always been outside the house doing other stuff.
Right.
And with that, it comes with a lot of this sort of stereotypical, being Black in America, single parent household. But on top of that, we had a computer in the house eventually. Like when we got to later part of elementary school, middle school, we got a computer in the house. I was able to have access to information and sort of hack away at things. And it became kind of like a norm eventually. So I've always tinkered, but I graduated college with a finance degree because I got scholarships. So I had good grades, got scholarship, but finance was like, I don't have any money, so I'm going to learn how money works. So I got the job. I got the college degree for finance in 2008.
Okay.
And in 2008 is when everything crashed. No one was hiring, no name people with in finance, you basically, if your dad plays golf or if your dad has a financial planner or a stockbroker, that's you're in.
Right.
100%. You could do everything else, but you're going to start on the bottom. And at the moment, people on the bottom in 2008 were the people who already had jobs. So they basically pushed out anybody who was doing entry level stuff. And it's something to think about too as well when you pick your degree or you pick your path. It's it's all about your network. And I learned that firsthand when I couldn't get a job in 2008. So from that day, I was like, man, I need to know people. I need to meet people. So fast forward to learning how to code. Always tinkered with code. I built MySpace pages, did light CSS, did the whole, social network to early 2000s stuff.
Right.
But I never actually pursued it as a thing. It's this is serious. I should learn it. It was more yeah, I could do this. Give me a half a day on a Saturday. I'll get you a little server up and running. Fast forward when I got married and then had my first kid doing full-time sales with the finance degree, 4 years out of college, I did not like doing sales. I am very much an introvert. I learned how to be an extrovert through sales.
Right.
But you're only as good as your last month in sales. So if you did not hit your number, no one cares.
Right.
No one cares about you. They just care that you hit your number. If you didn't hit your number twice in a row, you should start looking for other jobs, which is basically the mantra in sales. Now, there are the people in the comments or whatever. I run great sales teams or whatever. That's cool. But come back to me when you all don't hit your number month after month or quarter after quarter. Your great sales team or your great sales manager, they're not your manager anymore. They don't care.
Right.
Your manager might stick around, but the team is not going to stick around. So at that time, my son was born 11 weeks early, which is very, very early.
Right.
You have kids, it's
Stressful.
9 months.
Yeah.
So anything earlier than 5 weeks, it's a concern. He was 11 weeks early, which meant we were 11 weeks in the hospital. While in the hospital, I had a lot of time to think that, wow, sales is not great because I'm over here in the hospital and people are ringing up my phone and hitting up my email and no one cares. Out of office, doesn't matter. I'm the only one that can sell this stuff.
Right.
Which is the sort of system that was set up for me in my success. I was promoted twice in 1 year.
Wow.
In that year that my son was born. And that didn't matter. So I had this idea for an app. I was I'm going to spend some time while I'm just sort of sitting around waiting for him to grow and get bigger and be able to be released from the hospital. I'm going to build this app. So I started doing all the research. I knew because I tinkered, I should learn, Python or I should learn Objective-C. And then every time I went to a book, it was before you learn Objective-C, go learn C. And I'm oh crap, I got to go learn C. So I wanted to learn C. And then I'm oh, I don't know how to build anything. So then I found Ruby on Rails. Eventually I got to that point through YouTube. And they're oh, you can build an app super quick with a bunch of scaffolding and stuff like that. So ended up learning Ruby on Rails in the hospital, ended up building an app, building this app while in the hospital and my son coming home. So by January, I had a working app. So he was born in August. So by January, I had something that worked.
Wow.
And at that point, I was wow, people are getting paid more than I'm getting paid in sales with the bonus. They're getting paid as junior developers in Florida.
Right.
And Florida is it's not top tech talent or anything there's top tech talent, but not top tech salary.
Exactly.
But that salary, which was at the time $65K a year, that was a little bit more than I was making with my bonus doing inside sales.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, technically I was making a little bit more than that if you really look at how I over exceeded my bonus.
Right.
But on paper, if I did 100% of sales, I would not get more than $65K. I did more than 100% most of the time, but like just on paper, I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I working extra hard when I can just get a paycheck and write code and do what I'm doing for fun on the weekends?
So you built in the hospital with no technical training as far as going to college or no mentor. Did you have a mentor while you were learning the code?
Yeah, so that's the thing. I tried building it on my own, and I found it really quickly. I would get stuck like for days and be like, I don't know how to do this thing. Yeah. And at that point, I was like, I'm making a little bit of money. I'm getting my bonuses, but they were just basically going into my mortgage or stuff like that. So I'm like, I didn't even mention this. I was actually getting my MBA at the same time while I was learning how to code and my son being born. So I was like, let me just pay a little bit of money to like pay somebody to teach me when I get stuck. So like, I'm only going to reach out to them when I get stuck. Right. So to make it worthwhile. So I ended up signing up for a program who matched you with a mentor. The program is called block.io. And I did like tons of research. I asked tons of friends. I even was on the internet and read it and like looking it up and like, is this legit? And like no one had answers because everything was brand new. Like boot camps were brand new. Dev boot camp was brand new. Hack Reactor didn't even exist yet. Right. Like everything was brand new. So I'm just like, I'm going to take a chance. I ended up paying $5,000 for this mentor. Cause I'm like, if you're making $120K a year, $5,000, it's going to be worth your while. For 3 months, every time I got stuck, I'd ask a question and be like, okay, got this far. How do I implement geolocation data inside my app so I could search? And it's like, okay, look at this, and this. Here's a link here. Here's a a library here. And I was like, cool. Implement it. Okay. I did this, but I'm stuck here. How do I do authentication? Okay, well, here's a library here. And like he would just basically unblock me, just like he would do as a junior engineer to a senior engineer. Right. He would just unblock me whenever I just got like ultimately stuck. And I'd only use them when I got stuck. And it was actually a practice that I ended up just using my entire career. Is just like, okay, I'm going to get stuck like really bad. And then that's when I have the question. And then what would happen is I actually start writing a blog post of like how I got stuck. Because I knew if I solved it, then I would just finish the blog post. Right. And I would do this 2 to 3 times a week, is just write a blog post. And I would do this every week. And it got to the point where this blog, I would end up just tweeting it to like my 3 or 10 followers. I started gaining a following. And it's because what I did is I was doing Ruby on Rails. So I Googled top 100 Ruby developers. Right. And I followed all of them. And then I would go into their blog post and be like, oh, hey, this was good. This actually helped me. Or, hey, I loved what you did here. Like, just be positive. Just like be that same avatar you see on Twitter right now. That's the same avatar I had back then. Wow. And I'd just be like, hey, thanks so much for this. It was super helpful. And then they would follow me and be like, oh, he's writing blog posts. I'm going to read his stuff. And like most of it was garbage. But eventually I started learning how to write. Because I'm not a language arts major. Like I could speak well, but I cannot write well. So I ended up learning how to write and getting past that. And then people started tweeting out my stuff to the point where, because people were tweeting out my stuff, somebody reached into my DMs and said, hey, I've been reading your blog. Would you like to have a meeting? That meeting turned into an interview without no preparation. They're just like, yeah. So my boss is right here. Do you want to interview for this role?
There's so much that you went through on your journey that I admire. One of the things is when you had your mentor, right, you had the initiative to try it first and not only try and get stuck, but then come back to your mentor and say, I tried this, and this. I think a lot of people miss that on their journey, especially early. They either, one, ask for help immediately, or two, ask for help, but does not come back and say, this is what I tried. Can you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the thing that, and I ended up figuring out a framework for this. And that's the thing is like in sales, you got to learn how to scale. Right. Like if you're emailing or cold calling every single person in the Rolodex, you got to figure out how to do that, but do it faster. So like the way I used to do this is like, I would just go and do a ton of prep work. And then like the first hour after lunch, I just call all of them, like bang, bang, bang. Just go through the list. It's like you got to pull a Band-Aid off as fast as possible. Right. Otherwise you're just like, you're toying with yourself. Like it's going to hurt no matter what. So just pull it off. Yeah. So like with sales, I would always just dive right in. And it's because I was super nervous. I was introverted. I could not do cold calls, and I had to like package it up into a couple hours, and I would just do all my calls. Same thing with like meeting with my mentor. Like going to my mentor and be like, oh, I tried everything. I know you taught me this. I know I was supposed to like, figure this out on my own. But I wanted to show that I didn't just like get stuck and then go walk over into my email and be like, hey, mentor, I'm stuck.
Right.
I wanted to show that like basically I'm giving you value and I'm listening, and I wrote this down. And that's why I did a blog post, is because like I could always go back to the blog and be like, okay, my mentor's name was Adam. And when Adam was like, okay, this is how you do it, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to write this down. Here's my blog, just to prove that like I'm getting this and we're going to move forward. And like what would happen is like I would eventually write out the blog post. And as I was writing out my thought of like what I tried, I would come to an answer on my own. Because once you actually sit and think about it, is like, I tried this, and this, it didn't work. But when I don't think I tried this, oh, this worked. Okay, here's a blog post, write it out,
Right.
moving on, shipping the next thing. And it's all about like, one, package up treat your time as valuable, package it up, but also like consistency is something I learned out of that. Also just being able to like organize thoughts. I've got a YouTube video on my channel called how to, I always forget what I call it. It's like one of my first videos, and it's about how to prove your point technically. So how to basically create developer content. And I use this for my pull request. It's same framework. I built this, and this, here's the answer. And that's how I organize all my GitHub pull requests. So that way, when anybody walks into my GitHub pull request and see my code to do code review, like, wow, Brian really thought through this process. Like he has his code, but also he wrote a story on how he solved this problem, and he turned this corner, and like he solved it with this library. And that has also been like the ground I've been standing on with my open source contributions, with sort of leveling myself up to get my next bonus or get my next promotion. It's just like really just setting up myself that I have a track record of being able to always be teaching,
Right.
but always be providing value in everything I touch.
Providing value is important, especially when you start talking promotion and raises. It's in the fact that you're able to establish that track record to say, okay, I think I deserve a raise or a promotion, but here's why. You can present that. You can present, because I'm sure, when you're doing those blog posts, when you're speaking at events, when you're creating content, you're tracking all that. Those have metrics, and those metrics matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, and that's the thing too as well, because like what always happens is like you work at a big company, I work at a big company. Whenever you do like your self-review process, they always ask you is like, do your self-review, tell us what you did, tell us why you deserve full 100% bonus or 100% marks. And a lot of times what we do is like we don't really think about like, hey, one day someone's gonna ask me what I did last 6 months.
Right.
I should probably keep a list myself.
Yeah.
Like no one's keeping the list for you. Like if you have a great boss, like they will, but honestly, I don't even know if that would be a great boss, because if they're keeping track of all the stuff you're doing, what are they, like are they actually teaching you how to grow?
Right.
Like you should always have like there was somebody actually was on a Twitter space, and this person was talking about how they want the self affirmations and like store those somewhere. So like when someone says, hey, great job, or hey, you're so good at this, or like make you feel good with a compliment, save those, because what's going to happen is like you're one day be like, oh man, I don't think I can cut this out. I can't cut this. Like I'm not sure if I'm developer material, or I don't know if I can be senior dev or principal, whatever it is. Store those in like an email, store those in a folder, because what's going to happen is like, even if it's just work related, someone's going to ask you like, okay, should you get a promotion? And you're going to be like, yeah, I did stuff. And it's like, what'd you do? It's like, I can't remember. Like you should keep track of that yourself. And that's what I've done with the blog. That's what I do internally for all the work I do. Keep a short list, and that way people are like, hey, what have you been working on lately? Like I literally, it's funny you asked about the GitHub office. I used to go in the office one day a week, and I go in specifically, strategically on the weeks we hire people, because GitHub flies everybody to San Francisco on the week you get hired to do the boot camp. And on Thursdays is the day where you have lunch as a normal employee. You can just sit downstairs and you're just like released before you go fly back home. So I would go on a Thursdays the week we hired people to go meet folks. And I would just basically to sell myself and like go see if there's opportunity for collaboration. Like we hire some pretty awesome folks, so like this like famous folks in developer space. So I'm gonna go meet them. Be like, hey, this is me. Yo, we're gonna talk. We're gonna work together. Like, don't forget my face. And I do that intentionally because that's what it's about the hustle. I want to basically put myself in a place where I can always I can excel, but also I can be the supportive for people who just joined the company. And the other thing I was going to bring up is in the office, I didn't have a desk. I have a locker, and my locker was right across the hall. So not even a hall. It was like about like 4 steps away from the CEO's office.
Wow.
So my locker is at where the CEO sits every day when he goes in the office. So I'm over there like, get my laptop and like, my mouse and keyboard. And the CEO sees me every single time in the office. I mean, what's up, Nat? Yeah, how you doing? And like a couple times he's been like, hey, so what are you working on lately? All right, cool. Thanks for asking. Well, I'm working on this, and this. What do you think? Like I'm actually able to pick his brain strategically and be at the place that he walks in every single day. And it's honestly, I don't even know if he still has office there because the pandemic and everything, right. if they rearrange stuff, but like it's right next to the back door. So like he easily can just like be in and be out without going and anybody noticing. But I see him every time he's there because that's my locker. So like I'm just in there doing stuff. So hopefully I still have that locker when we go back to the office. Actually, the office is open now. I should probably check it out.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. But before we do, I want to go back to your mentorship relationship. For those that want to get started with software development, like I think you mentioned that you were older when you got started. You didn't go to college and all of that. For the people that want to, let's say, take that path, do you recommend paying $5,000 and getting a mentor and starting coding?
Yeah, I mean, we're different days today. Like there's so much more free information and very targeted. Like you go through YouTube right now and you see so many people who have awesome YouTube accounts, who also have great courses and great mentorship programs. So like James Q Quick is one of them. He has great content. He has a great mentorship program. He has a great Discord. Like you could just hang out in this Discord and just like do what I do with the CEO of GitHub. Just do the same thing. Just have your locker set up in the Discord, and like every time you're in there, he's like, "Hey, what's up, James? What are you working on, James? Can I help you out with something else?"
Right.
And like he can hand you small pieces of work, and this is not a guaranteed. Like I don't know what James does this with his audience, but like if he's working on a project, which I'm always doing open source stuff, I always have small things for people to work on. You can basically get mentored by me one-to-one. Like I'm selling you, this is free advice, free work. I can give you a quick node script that I would love to get written, which I've done twice in the last week. I've given somebody in my DMs looking for open source work rather. And I'm just like, hey, this is stuff I just cannot get to. Can you help me? And so pay $5,000. Yeah, you could. You'd probably get ahead really fast, but like we're at different times. It's normal for technical YouTubers to hold a full-time job at Microsoft and have a YouTube account and have a Discord and be accessible to you. Yeah. So I would say like maybe join a community first before shelling out the $5,000 because it was $5,000 that was basically my savings. But I was all in. I didn't mention this before, but before I started getting my MBA, I actually tried doing Android development the summer previous and failed miserably. So my goal was like, don't fail. Like, put money in it, but you're not failing at this. And luckily I succeeded. I had the bandwidth. I had a very supportive wife who also was like cool with me staying up super late, waking up super early to work on this problem.
Right. Did you sell your app? What did you end up doing with it?
Yeah. So this app was, it's called Choich. And I ended up just letting it sit because when I found out, basically it's Yelp for churches. So I wanted to find, when we were in the hospital, we wanted to find a church in Tampa because it was about 20 miles from our home. Right. We were going to church, but we wanted to go to a different church. We just didn't want the emotional baggage of like walking to people we know. Like we just wanted to be supported, not feel like we had to like cry the entire time, whether our son was going to live or die, which sounds very morbid, but that was literally the reality we had. Right. So I built this app to basically find churches based on location. It still exists on GitHub. It's actually an archived project. It's just that I found out that one thing, churches are very weird about like community messages, but also like how to in moderation, stuff like that. Also, churches can sometimes be a very weird place for other types of communities, stuff like that. So at back 2015 putting church, or 2014 putting churches online was just not a thing.
Right.
Like there were churches online, but they were very progressive and forward thinking. The majority of the US churches were not there. I think they are today. But it was more of like, I wanted to build a business that would be a little easier and not more of like, hey, trust me, being online is going to grow your congregation, and not have to try to continue to convince them. Also, like I was a church attendee. I didn't have a background or any theology degree or anything like that. Right. So I didn't have anything to stand on. And I had an offer to go work at a company to make more money. So I'm like, I'm going to sideline this app and go take a full-time job. And that's basically what happened.
I think it would be a cool app, because one of the things about visiting churches, like if somebody tells you to come to their church, then you got to deal with them asking you, how'd you like the church? Are you coming back every time they see you? But if you got this app, you're going on your own. You're finding a church, you're checking it out.
Yeah.
And you're not tied to, those relationships of those expectations of you coming back or anything.
Yeah. My whole thing was like, I wanted to find a church that had this type of music, had this type of, kids program, whatever it is, like this flavor of church.
Yeah.
And that's what we were looking for when we were looking for churches in Tampa. But like Googling churches in Tampa was like an impossible feat.
Wow.
Back in 2014.
Yeah.
And honestly, even today, Google churches in Tampa and you're still going to get a very mixed bag of like, I don't know. It's just like, not to knock any other styles of churches, because I know everybody's all different walks of life, but like,
right.
I know what my flavor is, and I was looking for a specific type of flavor, and I just was not getting it just by every Sunday going to a new church. And I think that's what a lot of folks are doing. Like at the end of the day, what I found out from that process, that people really just want community.
Yeah.
And what I've done is I built an entire different app that looks very similar, which is open source. And that's all about the community around open source. And that's the community I've basically been maintaining for the past couple of years.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you have a Twitter account with open source. You have a YouTube channel with open source, and a GitHub. What is that? Project? Repo? What is it? Because I've seen different projects under it.
Yeah. It's an organization on GitHub,
okay.
Which has a couple different projects. One being open source is the main project, but I have some offshoot projects. One being Flavor Flav, which is, I'm going to rename that. It was more of like a stand-in name, but it's basically open source recommendations algorithm to basically, you log in, it tells you what projects to work on.
I'm interested. So I really haven't done anything with open source. Like I mentioned before, my background is network engineer. So the whole mindset of software development is one of those things that I'm still learning. You know what I mean? So I'm definitely going to try and check out open source. Now, for somebody that, let's say, wants to contribute or wants to be a part of their, learn, grow, what's your suggestion, and how can they sign up or whatnot?
Yeah. So like for the sake of learning and growing, I always find it the best to have a problem to solve. So whether it's like you just want to network your home to be able to turn lights off and on from your phone, maybe you just want to consolidate all that into one app, or you want to use Home Assistant, which is open source. Like have a problem and then solve it with code. One of the problems I built when I moved to the Bay Area, we've got two baseball teams out here. We got the A's and we got the Giants. And I live in between both stadiums.
Wow.
So that means that every time I go to work, when I used to go to work in person, I'd have to check to see if there's a baseball game, because the same train I ride is the same train that goes to both stops or both stadiums. So I found out firsthand. We got this thing called the Bay Series, which is when the Giants and the A's play. It happens twice a year. And it was like the week that I found a place to live after moving across country. I went to Target, which was around the corner from my work, downtown San Francisco. I got a bed, an air mattress, some pillows, and I walk on the train with my hands full, and it's during the Bay Series. And so it's like right after the game, because I worked late, and then I'm like, oh, let me go to Target so I can sleep tonight. Right. Because I was working late because I have no furniture, because the furniture was being shipped across the country.
Right.
So it's like, let me go get a bed, and let me go get some blankets and pillows and stuff like that. Get on the train, and I'm like, already hot and sweaty because it's like summertime in San Francisco, like actual summertime, like humidity. And then the Bay Series is going on. It's a bunch of drunk fans who are like this absolutely plastered on the train because, train system means that you don't have to worry about driving home. You just sort of stumble your way off the platform from the BART. So it was absolutely miserable experience. I had stood up the entire time. I was like, I am never riding a train during this baseball series. I'm not a baseball fan either. So like, I'm not going to pay attention and be like, oh, it's the Bay Series.
Right.
Like, I had no idea. So I built an app basically to tell me whenever there's a baseball game at the Giants stadium, because that's the most problematic one. It's like the worst traffic. And then I would just wake up in the morning and I would just look at my phone and be like, okay, Giants game. I'm coming home early tonight. And eventually I built it using serverless functions in AWS. And I also built it in Go. I built it in JavaScript. I built it in Ruby. I just rebuilt it every single year because baseball happens every year. So I literally learned how to write Go APIs building the same app because I happen to need to rebuild a new API for it. So I guess what I'm getting at, if you want to level up, solve a problem, because you're going to solve the problem until you fix it, or you can fail. That's totally fine. But I think if you got to fail at something,
right?
Because like with programming, it's all about you fail until you get a success or a passing test or a feature, and then you go build the next feature until you fail, and then you actually get a feature that works, and then you fail again, and you get something that works. And it's a process. You have to be used to failing and failing and failing, and then succeeding, and then failing and failing and failing and succeeding.
So when you develop your code, and I think that's awesome that you did that. Did you host it? I know you said you hosted it in AWS, but did you put it on Android? Did you put it on iPhone? Or the iTunes, whatnot?
Yeah. So I did get on the I didn't get on the app store. I actually got it on my phone. So specifically, I built an iPhone app. So basically, I get a notification. I don't have it running anymore, but I would get a notification that would tell me, "Hey, baseball today." If there's a baseball game today, it's gonna give me a notification every morning. Basically, what I'm getting at.
Okay.
And I didn't put it on the app store because of money. I'm very frugal.
Yeah.
So if I get people to use it, I got to start paying for servers.
Right.
So I've never actually got something in App Store where I have users because I've never actually tried to monetize any of the apps I wrote.
So with Apple, you can do like a developer account to be able to create apps and put them on your phone without hosting them to the App Store, right? Correct?
Yeah. So you can just basically just point it to your phone as the one environment, but you don't have to get it on the App Store, which is a common way for you to test your apps. So a lot of like the iOS or Android developers will just test it on their phone. So that's the sort of ceiling I've gotten. I'm more of a web developer, so like I have way more confidence in hosting stuff on domains and getting on websites,
right,
than I do specifically shipping iOS and Android apps.
Okay, so there are different types of developers, right? You're more of a web developer, but it sounds like you are in depth in several different languages.
Yeah.
For someone that's getting started, which language would you recommend, and how do you balance all these different languages?
Yeah, it's like a very contentious, like I can recommend something and someone will be like, oh no, you should do it this way. Right. So like I'm gonna give my answer, but with the caveat of like, do what works for you, or do whatever the last person recommended you do, but stick with it. Okay. So like hands down, you could probably use JavaScript to ship something pretty quickly. You could also learn just the one language to do front end and back end, and you could probably get really far from there. My iOS app that I mentioned, I built that in JavaScript actually. I use React Native, which came out of Facebook, which allows me to write JavaScript code to deploy to the App Store. It also deploys to the Android Google Play Store as well. So like I would say JavaScript would get you started really quickly. Okay. If your goals is to do more server side or server based stuff, so perhaps you want to get way into like getting servers up and running or running scripts or doing like DevOps or SRE type stuff, like you could probably not go wrong with like things like Python or Go to accomplish that. What I was told by my mentor back in the day, which is another reason why I'm glad which I also want to put off, if you do want a mentor, you can get free mentorship. Right. You just ask questions. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't have to be official capacity. Like ask questions. If people answer them, ask another question. If they answer it, they'll ask another question. And if they don't like it, then like maybe read the room But like just asking questions and being in community is a great way for free mentorship. But my mentor, he actually told me about having 4 different languages in like 4 levels. So like I learned on Ruby was my first language. Ruby was like kind of like Python. It's server. You can do a lot of scripts. You can do a lot of networking stuff. You can do a lot of. You could also build web apps with it.
Right.
So Ruby was my first language. So that was a given. JavaScript is the language of the web. Like you're going to eventually have to know some JavaScript. You don't have to know a ton, but you need to know some JavaScript.
Right.
And then the last 2 are things that you could sort of like get away with, mix and match. But I wanted to do mobile development, so I ended up learning Objective-C/Swift to do iOS.
Okay.
And that was like my mobile introduction to mobile development, which drew Objective-C and then Swift. I say both because I learned Objective-C and then Swift came out. So then I had to learn, well, I didn't have to, but I learned Swift right after.
Right.
So I've got an understanding of both those languages. Actually, I have way more understanding of Swift. I stopped writing Objective-C as soon as Swift came out because it's so much easier to read and write. And then the last one was something low level. So like a C or a Go. If you want to do some system level programming, C++ or Rust. So you can build like desktop or server based code.
Okay.
Things that like control your drones or control your servers. That's how I kind of break it up. You could probably just get away with one, but if you want to get a breadth, learning something in the scope of like mobile server or low level server, and then something with servers, and then also JavaScript, like probably know a little bit of JavaScript.
I think I've been doing Python for so long that I'm comfortable in Python. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I'm understanding the value in what you're saying, because I think learning different languages, you learn how to think differently in those languages. Because one way you may do something, or the way, even though Java is object oriented and Python is also object oriented, the constructs that you have to face or deal with in Java are different than the execution of Python. And so you learn new skills with each language, that you code in. Is that true?
Yeah, with Java, you get a compile, like the JVM, the Java compiler.
Right.
It's a whole nother ball game.
Yep.
But you learn something. What compiled code is something that it helps you with system level programming or doing stuff that is a little more intensive.
Right.
That should not break in production. Python gives you a little more leeway. So like your stuff could break in production.
Yeah.
But you get a better developer experience where you can ship something faster. So like replace, Rust, Go, whatever, my example, with Java, and you're good to go. Python, Java is a good combination. Also with Python, you can do a lot of, like you can do Django, which does a lot of the JavaScript for you. It sprinkles the JavaScript is what they say. So like you could scaffold some JavaScript in there without needing to actually know how it's written or how it works. But it just comes down to like computer science is such like a large ecosystem that like even like the mantra of full stack development is kind of a myth, because like it's so complicated from all the way from the byte level code to the front end CSS.
Right.
There's so many layers and levels that very few people know from the byte code to the CSS. Like this, it's not a thing that you can accomplish. You could work on it, but then that goes back to the thing of like, you got to solve real problems. Like you can learn how to get the fastest, or like the fastest algorithms and the fastest loops, and like how to like have the garbage collected perfect code. But at the end of the day, like garbage collected perfect code, are you actually running that in production, or is this like some sort of like prototype of like you're just showing off?
Right.
And it's like the same thing as like so I played sports in high school. So like you think about like basketball, like you could have the perfect shot when no one's around, but like when you actually have a defense, can you make that same shot?
Right.
And that's like what it comes down to, like when people really get in the nuance of like whiteboard this example problem for me. In real life, you're not going to whiteboard anything. Like, yeah, maybe you whiteboard stuff in an engineering sync and talk through the approach. But at the end of the day, you're reading books. You're learning from other people who already solved the problem.
Right.
So like, do you really need to commit it to memory on how to do bubble sort? Or can you just go to Stack Overflow, look up bubble sort, and re-implement that into Java or whatever?
That's a good way to think about it, because I know for network engineer, there's a lot of things, let's say for certification testing or for interviews that you have to memorize. But it seems like for software development, it's more so of, I don't know, can you think like a software developer? Can you find the answer? How deep can you go to get the answer, it seems?
Yeah. And it just comes down to that. Like, if I always pull up analogies, it's my job. So like I'm a developer advocate and I always have stories to share.
Right.
So like I have an analogy of like the NBA and how actually specifically Michael Jordan. I happened to watch the Michael Jordan documentary while everybody's watched it on Netflix.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about that is that Michael Jordan was a great player on his own. He came from a great school. He made it to a very poor team, which is the Bulls.
Yeah.
Like no one cared about the Bulls then. And he had a decent coach, but him and his coach did not get along. His coach had a great offense, but they didn't get along. So he got fired. Phil Jackson took over, who was the assistant. He took the great offense, and he happened to be a great person to be able to talk to Michael Jordan and like on his level.
Yeah.
And between that, he was able to actually see the offense into fruition, which was the triangle offense. Which that alone, if you think about the triangle offense, it's all about intuition.
Yeah.
So like if I'm being double teamed, if there's 5 people on the court, so if 2 people on me, there's 1 person open.
Yeah.
So your intuition is like, okay, well, in the triangle offense, you always have someone to the left and to the right of you.
Yeah.
So with your intuition, you're like, oh, this person's guarding me. That person's open. I can do a no-look pass. And it looks like it's magic, but like it's intuition because I know if I'm being double teamed by 2 people, I know, Horace Grant or whoever it is going to be wide open with the shot or with the assist or whatnot.
True. Here's a question about software development that when it comes to unit testing, when you write your code, do you unit test your code or is that required? Where does that come into play for a developer?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of mantra around like test-driven development. So write tests before you write code.
Right.
It's a great way to get good documentation and have tests for your code as well.
Right.
But the answer is like, yes, I do unit tests a lot of my stuff. If it's just like a quick example on Twitch, I don't really write a ton of tests because a lot of times I write some code that I'm never going to use ever again. It's more of like an example or like prototyping and seeing how things work.
Right.
So because I haven't sat on a full-time engineering role, I haven't done a lot of testing.
Okay.
I test for all my side projects I test, but for just like trying something new, I don't test. So you can get away with that testing. It's like brushing your teeth, or it's like, flossing rather. Like you could floss morning and night and you're good to go.
Yeah.
You could floss just morning and you're good to go.
Yeah.
You could not floss and it's questionable, but also you could be good to go. It's up for debate.
Right.
So like eventually you're going to find out that you probably should have flossed for the past 5 years. But also like if you're just going to maybe it gets a little bit of Listerine in there or whatever, choose your own adventure. Like, what your limit is. And like, if you're going to basically, if your teeth are falling out or if your code is falling all over in production because you just can't keep the thing up, maybe you need to start writing tests or maybe you should start flossing.
Okay. We talked about unit testing, which, kind of leads us to integration testing. When I saw that you had JAMstack, that's something that you created?
Oh, JAMstack? No. That's it's a term that was created by a friend of the CEO of Netlify,
okay.
And it's like it's an approach to organizing your projects and how you sort of approach this. And rather, do you want to build everything yourself, or do you want to lean on the existence of companies and projects or engineers that can solve those problems for you?
And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because outside of just knowing programming languages, there's so many different moving pieces, like serverless computing, containers, Docker, NPM, Node.js, all of these different tools that are out there. Jenkins, you name it, there's a tool that I think if you look at the DevOps model, it's ridiculous how many tools that are on there, but how many do we actually need to know in order to be successful in this field?
Probably close to none, to be quite honest. Because like going back to the full stack development, it depends on what you specialize in. So if you're specializing in consuming data from an API that your team has built, you're probably very rarely touching Docker, or you're probably very rarely touching some of these other tools.
Right.
Like you might just be one cog in the wheel. So like if you're on a massive team, like just take the whatever the front end UI for WebEx, like that UI is built by probably a pretty good sized team, and not every person on that team knows every single piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Because depending on how long you've been on that team, you might not even get a chance to mess with this widget or this dashboard. But I would say knowing a little bit or knowing the existence of things is probably going to get you further than deep diving on everything. So like for me, example, when it comes to like Kubernetes and Dockers and DevOps, like I watch videos, I have some projects that leverage them,
Right.
but like I have not to the fullest extent of my knowledge touched everything of Docker, touch everything of Kubernetes, touch all the DevOps stuff, because I don't need to. Because majority of stuff, like I just shipped something on GitHub a couple weeks ago, and it's built on existing knowledge. Like someone before me came and built off this entire DevOps pipeline, so that way when I come and go ship something first time as like brand new person, I'm building on top of the shoulders of giants. So
Right.
I guess the real answer is like, if you want to be an expert, you can. If that's the path you want to go. Programming it's like a blank slate. Like you build the pieces and you build your tool belt in the fashion that you want to build it in. My first 2 years as a full-time engineer, I never touched CSS. Absolutely, this legit just never touched it.
Right.
And it was because we had design systems. We also had front-end engineers, people who specialize on doing the front-end stuff that wanted to do that. And I was a junior engineer just trying to learn how to do the basic stuff.
Right.
So like I didn't want to learn everything about CSS at that time because I could lean on folks who wanted to do it.
Right.
I did the same thing with PHP. Like whenever someone wants me to touch a WordPress blog, I always find someone else on the team who's done it before, because I don't want to spend all my time learning that.
Yeah.
And to this day, I've never learned how to do it because I always end up finding someone else who wants to do it and who can do it.
Man, that's a real. I think when you're on a team and you have people that, let's say, love to do PHP, or you have somebody that is really versed and loves to do Python, but you're, let's say, good at building containerized environments with Kubernetes and whatnot, you can actually balance the workload, and collaborate. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is that I would bring up is there's a lot of work that no one wants to do too as well.
Yeah.
So the best way to level up is find that work and do it.
Yeah.
The thing is, the reason why I do a lot of JavaScript today is because, and the project I worked, the job that brought me out to San Francisco, we had a full stack project, and majority of the engineers all wanted to write Ruby because it's a really easy language to work with, operate in. A lot of the infrastructure was there, and then they added an Angular front end that only one person really knew how to use. So every time someone wanted to have changes or updates or had questions, they had to reach out to this one person on the team,
Right.
because he had all the knowledge. So I made it a point that I was just going to learn that, so I didn't have to ask the questions anymore. So I basically took the project and upgraded it all from CoffeeScript to ES6, which ES6 is like the modern JavaScript you see today.
Oh, okay.
CoffeeScript is like it's kind of like jQuery. It kind of makes JavaScript easier to write and looks kind of nice.
Right.
But CoffeeScript was no longer maintained, so we had to move off of it eventually.
Wow.
So what I would do is like every Friday I would just like spend half a day updating all the CoffeeScript files, and then when I got home I'd just be like watching TV, copying, pasting, updating CoffeeScript, and see if it compiles. And I learned JavaScript really fast that way, because I went through the entire project and updated all of the files. And then as I was updating, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know you could do that in JavaScript. And I updated the file, like, oh, I didn't know you could do this in JavaScript. So I started getting like more at-bats or more intuition,
Right.
to the point where I became the other person who knew how to how to update the JavaScript files.
Nice.
That and eventually led me to join the team with the other person who knew JavaScript well to build an entire project with a new framework called React. And at the time, React had been out for a couple of years, but no one used it.
Right.
And it started picking up a little bit. So one of the more senior engineers in the team worked with me directly and leveled me up to build React code at a time where React was about to explode, like when it comes to like adoption, to the point where the last company I worked for, Netlify, I was employee 3 at a startup. They hired me specifically for my React knowledge. And it was because I spent time doing the work that no one else wanted to do, which was the JavaScript code conversion, to eventually getting put on the React project, to eventually having enough React knowledge at a time when no one had React knowledge, to getting a job at a company as employee 3. Now, this company is huge at this point. Like they're, turning heads and shipping really big stuff.
You are a blessed dude. You are a blessed dude.
Yeah, no, I believe it. Yeah.
For somebody to take you under their wing and show you a language that's about to blow up, and man, that's a blessing right there.
Yeah, and so like I bring up a lot of analogies, and like I bring a lot of my personal upbringing in life to kind of understand my situation. Like this is the same thing that back when Kanye was trying to get his up,
right?
Working at Rockefeller, just making beats and like constantly selling himself. And I was always a big fan of Kanye growing up. And I know he's kind of taking a turn. I'm not sure what he's doing right now, but everybody's got to have like their mentor or have the person to bring him up. And like when you see in rap or hip hop, you always see the person bringing up the next person.
Right.
And I always found the person who could bring me up to the next level. And at this point in my career, I'm always looking for the person to bring up, because I feel like I'm at a point where I've not reached the top. Just like make that clear. But I'm always trying to bring other people up to where I'm at, because I think there's a lot of opportunities to sort of level up people. So like, I didn't know React was going to blow up. The engineer who taught me React didn't know it was going to blow up. I think the people who created React didn't know it was going to blow up. It was like, you just roll the dice, because there's another framework I use, which is called Ember, and that never blew up. Like I learned Ember really well. I built that same project, which I called it Hustlin'.
Right.
I built that project in Ember as well. Learned Ember pretty well, and it's never had its time. Never blew up, never had like as demand as React has today. Ember just never had that demand. So like, there are going to be languages, it's going to be frameworks. Like when you ask about like, should I learn, should I go to Java? Should I learn JavaScript, or should I stick with Python? Who knows? Do what's going to give you the most fun effort. It's going to give you a way to basically build things.
How do you find out which language is great for whatever project that you want to work on, or the home automation solution that you want to do?
Yeah, it just comes down to this like, so I used to do this thing where, actually even going back further than this, I got a finance degree. In my very last semester before I graduated with no job, I did, I forgot the name of the class, but it was basically institutional investments.
Right.
And that your job is to basically look at companies and see if they're going to take off stock wise. So like at the time, it's funny because I'm sitting here with the iPhone. I remember in that class, we would watch CNBC all the time. I'd always like do all my research. And I remember specifically watching the pre-announcement of the iPhone. And I had an iPod Touch at the time. And they're like, someone was joking. They're like, oh, we're going to make an iPod Touch a phone. It's like, where are you going to put the buttons? Because it was just one piece of glass.
Right.
It's like, how are you going to make phone calls? So you're going to tap on the screen? And yeah, that's exactly what happened. The thing blew up. At that time, Apple stock was like $68 before the iPhone.
Right.
You know what Apple stock is today? It's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot, and they've done a split,
yeah,
like at least 2 or 3 times since then.
Yep.
Because I was buying stock, I ended up buying stock in Bank of America at that time. So in 2008, Bank of America for $50 a share. That went down to $3 right after I graduated. Apple stock, it took a hit, but it shot up right after that, because as soon as the iPhone came out and they had the next version, everybody had it. And it's been up since then. So I guess I say that because I've been trained in college to look at companies and see what's on the up.
Right.
I'm doing the same thing with languages and frameworks in the developer space. So like, I say I didn't know about React, but after like spending a lot of time doing Ember, spending a lot of time doing Angular, and then seeing React and the adoption, but also I'm in San Francisco, so you can also hear the buzz and hear the conversations in person. It was almost guaranteed React was going to move heads and turn heads and do something at least for the next couple of years. I would never guess it would have been like the next, 6-7 years. But yeah, it was guaranteed it was going to at least turn heads for a little bit. So I do the same thing with whenever I try to do it with a language or I check a new library. The first thing I do is like check community. Like I go to meetup.com. Are there meetups for this language, for this framework?
Right.
If there are no meetups, then there's a good chance that it's either on the up or no one cares.
Right.
Is there a Reddit page? If there's a Reddit page, there's a good chance that people care. People are actually sharing stuff. Is the Reddit page full of memes or is it full of Stack Overflow questions and is it full of blog posts?
Right.
If it's just memes, then it's a good chance you're not going to get much done here. Like you might as well move on. Same thing with Stack Overflow. It's like, are there questions on Stack Overflow? If there are, then it's a good chance that you can probably grow and learn this thing. If there aren't, it's either on the up or no one cares. So like you have to make the decision of like whether it's on the up or no one cares. And the way I do that is I just ask people. I try to find out what people are working on. And I do this with my podcast. I do this with my live streams. People tell me what they're excited about. And the stuff they're excited about ends up taking off eventually. So I just do a lot of like, and it's the same thing you do with companies. It's like, I have an iPod Touch. I love my iPod Touch. Could Apple make a phone? I don't know. I'm not sure. But I love this thing. So I'm going to bank on they're going to figure it out. So that way, every time Apple ships something, you're like, yeah, it's going to be, it's going to be banging because like, AirPods, like it's a solved problem. People have shipped that before that.
Right.
But for some reason, theirs is so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. Theirs is, they do the aesthetics and the marketing very well. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the one thing I learned too, as well, when it comes to, even as a developer, sometimes you can do a lot of hand waving in marketing or design, and people will attach themselves to that over whether your code works or if your code is performant. And like so like my first dev job as a junior engineer, we'd had a hack day, and everybody on the team who I worked with, which is all the back end folks, we all did a hack day, and we all spent the entire day basically making like one thing work or one server thing happen.
Right.
And then the same team, we had two front engineers, which I mentioned before. They both did like these amazing, like aesthetically pleasing things during the hack day. And the person who judged the hack day was like the PM. And they're like, wow, this is so cool. Like their stuff is so good, but good job, guys. Like all the people who did the back end stuff.
Right.
And at that point I learned, like I need to learn how to do some CSS and JavaScript because if you want to win a hackathon, don't focus on the code working. Focus on what it looks like. Focus on the presentation. So I at that point I over-indexed all presentation, all CSS, all UI-based code, because I knew if I need to sell somebody on something, you need to have something to show. People will give you the benefit of the doubt that it will work eventually because you're a developer. You know code.
Right.
You just need time. Like no one knows how long it's going to take to build this feature. That's why when you, as an engineer, if you're a junior engineer, someone asks you like when you're going to be done with it, to say it's going to be done when it's done, because that's no other role is that an acceptable answer except engineers. It's going to be done when it's done.
That's interesting because you hear so much about agile and the sprints and the iterations, and actually in my last role it was all DevOps, and I had these iterations and I had to really learn how to deliver during those sprints. You know what I mean? Because if you look, I guess the Fibonacci number, whatever that is.
The Fibonacci theory.
Yeah. So once you establish that number, whatever that is for your team, now you have, what is it, the velocity. And they expect you to deliver that every time. So I had to learn that, okay, let me make sure I'm breaking this down to the smallest iteration and not, you know what I mean, trying to, I can get this much done, and then down the line you're jacked up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you just don't know what's going to come up. You don't know what's unseen. Like, I just came off a stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/bdougie. I'm working on a feature to recommend open source contributions. It's that Flavor Flav thing I mentioned.
Right.
When I go on stream, I have like the broad expectations, like I'm going to ship this feature. It's going to work in 2 hours.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be the case. So what I do is I open up issues that basically attack each segment of this process. So today I fixed a bug, shipped a different feature that also introduced a bug. So had to go back and be like, okay, I got to fix this. In this stream, we're going to fix the bug.
Right.
Next stream, we're going to make the other thing work. So like I shipped a feature that half works. It works in practice, but it doesn't work like fully. So for example, you could add a repo that's recommended, but it never removes the repo from the list, the first list, and adds to the second list to your list. So I basically shipped it without like the other feature of removing the repo from the list. Because I'm like, oh, I can do that in one stream. So I always break it up in bite-sized chunks. Because again, going back to the thing, it's like, it'll be done when it's done. But you're always trying to figure out, it's an agile development. You're always trying to figure out how to not game the system,
right,
but set expectations up right. So that way you under promise, but over deliver.
Yeah. Yep, that was the main thing I learned when I first started my pipeline is that. So okay, I want to get into community, but before I do, the thing that I want to talk about is, let's say, what is it, bdougie.live, right?
Yeah.
What did you use to build that?
That's built with Next.js. So Next.js is like a React framework that builds in a lot of other features. Makes it really easy to get a site up and running pretty quickly. Like the routing's built into the framework as well. So like I can have different pages like /projects or /whatever or /Twitch. That's all inferred in the project. But the backend itself is a GitHub repo. And I did this intentionally because I work at GitHub. I always build projects that I can talk about myself, but also talk about the work I do.
Right.
So working at GitHub, it's easy to talk about GitHub because every project I have is hosted on GitHub.
Right.
But this one's different because I'm actually using the GitHub API directly to every blog post every post on my bdougie.live site is a GitHub issue. So every comment is an issue on a comment. And I did that so I could talk about, if I have to do a talk or I'm chatting with you, I can explain how the GitHub API works by just going to my own website.
Okay. Now, your website is a static site, right?
Yeah. Well, technically, it's a server-side rendered site.
Okay.
So Next.js does have a feature to do server-side rendering on demand. So the way it works, it renders the API functionality, so like the thing I'm talking about, getting data from GitHub, with functions, so actual serverless functions. So the site itself that you see when you log in is a static site, but a lot of this functionality and the data that's on there is powered by serverless functions.
Okay. So for me, I want to learn JavaScript and front end. When you mentioned about making something look really good, I have all these Python apps, but my front ends are like these square boxes with a click button, and it's black and white. It looks terrible.
Yeah. That's the world I came from. That's why I found that one day that I need to learn how to make stuff look good.
And if you want to do that, JavaScript is the way to go. Yeah,
actually, CSS is probably going to get you further, because CSS is what's going to get you the actual styling. JavaScript, if you want to make the animations, or if you want to make things move, or if you want to make things dynamic on the page, JavaScript will do that. But just aesthetically pleasing. So like it's levels. So like, again, going full stack, you cannot know everything from back top to front.
Right.
But when it comes to front end developers, if you just take front end, like JavaScript's going to get you stuff to be able to consume data from the front end. It's going to be able to get stuff on the page and render it. It's also going to make stuff animate if you wanted to. But CSS is going to get the colors. It's going to make the positioning. That's going to be what's going to get your design system going.
Okay.
And then we move into non-coding concepts, which is just design systems and aesthetics and color choices and palettes.
Right.
I actually took a course online specifically for this, to learn color palettes and to learn grid systems. So like the one thing I learned when I worked as a full-time engineer with a designer at Netlify, which was my last job, is the 8-point font system. And this is something I never even thought about. But like when you style like a header and you choose that header to be 64 points, you choose it's 64 points because if you go down to the subheader, it's going to be 36 points as a subheader. And if you look at the regular text, it's going to be 24 points, which is going to be the body text that you have on the page. And it's specifically supposed to be 8 points because visually 8 points separated from each other.
Right.
It makes sense. Like as a designer and aesthetic and art, I don't have an art degree. I just happen to work with people who do have them.
Right.
And as soon as someone told me, it's like, oh, you just need to find the framework and stick to the framework. So like everything on the sidebar between the all the way in the metal of your computer to the white on my page, I'm going to be 16 points away always. Like it's standard. And I've never gotten rid of the 8-point font system or 8-point grid system because I learned it once and I'm like, oh, it makes sense.
It does.
And then you start seeing it everywhere. Same thing with fonts. Like fonts are like the sans serifs, you have the serifs. Those are all things again, not an art degree. I don't know anything about this, but I happen to just find a designer and ask them lots of questions. And they're like, yeah, well, everybody's using sans serif fonts because, it looks aesthetically pleasing to your eyes. Your eyes will get tired when you're reading long paragraphs. It's like everybody uses Verbato or uses like San Francisco font for Mac. And it's specifically because it's aesthetically pleasing to your eyes. And that's why when you see these trends on websites, so if you want like github.com, like the homepage, github.com/home, like the font they're using is Alliance number 2. It's the same font that looks very much like Vercel.com. It looks like Stripe.com because all these designers, they all talk to each other. They all have the same frameworks they pull from. And you just start picking from that. And then eventually, like bdougie.live, I'm stealing from all these other companies and sites because like, why am I going to create a new font system?
Right.
Like I'm just gonna steal from what's working.
That's like UX and UI, right? Is that UX or UI, or is that just?
Yeah. So UX is short for user experience.
Right.
So like what happens after you click login? What happens after you click this dashboard?
Right.
That's less of like aesthetically what's on the place on the page, but more of like your experience as you click through.
Okay.
So like if I click this button, should this page animate? Like that's the user experience. So like it is design, but it's more of like the flow. UI is the design.
Okay.
So UI is going to be like your buttons. Are they rounded 5 pixels? Are they rounded 16 pixels? Like your font size. Is it 8-point font? Is it starting 64 fonts? Like that's all part of your UI. And the thing about front end is like most front end developers or just full stack developers, they use the design system. So you want to set the rules up before you start writing code. Because if you start just throwing stuff on the page and like this one's 35 pixels and this one's 42, it's going to look chaotic. And it's going to look pretty bad eventually because nothing's going to make sense. So like what people use is like Tailwind or they use Bootstrap or they use like
Bootstrap,
Foundation. You use the design system because all those decisions have been made for you. So that way, if you build a page, you just pull from your container or your toolbox of design elements. And highly recommend if you're going to build a project, to get your first job, your next job, or your last job, pull from a design system because one day that blog or whatever that side project is, it's going to get out of date and you're going to have to update it. And it's going to take a lot of work for you to update that. And you will not get it done in time before you do that next interview.
Okay. All right. Man, so I'm sitting here thinking about the whole design thing. And when you mentioned CSS, like I mentioned, I do Python. So that's something I would integrate with Django or Flask to do the styling of whatever my API or front end is.
Yeah, so like with Django, I don't remember Django ships with Bootstrap out of the box. It ships with some design system. Okay. But I don't remember which one it is. But it usually comes with one. If not, there's like a Django, there's a command you can add for like adding a design system. So like that's a decision you should make like earlier in your project because it's very hard to go and rip out stuff. It's like basically if you have like you're staying in a house, like you have to redo that room. Like you don't want to be removing drywall because once you remove the drywall, you're like, oh man, asbestos. Right. Okay. Now we got to clean out everything. Now we got to, also we got, bugs. So now we got to fumigate. So like a lot of times with design systems is you don't want to start pulling down drywall because you're going to find something that's not good or up to code. Okay. And you're going to have to fix that. Yeah. So making the decision early is always going to be the best bet. Like pick a design system, stick with it. Or if you want to remove that design system, make sure you have another design system. So like replace it. Yeah. Otherwise, if you have which the problem I have with open source is a project I've been working on for years, I made the decision not to use a design system because I wanted to learn how to build one myself. And now every time I have to talk to somebody to work on the project, I have to explain how it works because no one knows like my design system that I built for my head.
Right.
And I didn't make all the right decisions as well. So I had to, well, actually, to be quite honest, I built the same design system with my designer at Netlify. So I had to basically use Netlify's design system. So that's why a lot of the UI elements look kind of the same.
Okay.
They've since basically left me. They're way advanced than I am,
Right.
Because I don't work there anymore. So like it's the same design system. It's just like the design system that unless you work at Netlify, you don't know what's happening. So like, it's a decision I have to like own and live with, but it also keeps me up to speed. Like if I want to learn more about design, I have a project I can learn with it, which is open source.
Wow. Okay. Which you talked about, you brought up open source for your open source project. You got a little time left?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things one of the last things I want to talk about is community. How you got to where you are was largely, from what I'm hearing, is due to you engaging in the community, putting yourself out there and networking with people. What advice do you have for others that are coming into the field?
Yeah, well, first thing you should be doing is you should follow me on Twitter, bdougie.live. Follow my YouTube account. Because I always point people to open source eventually. And the reason I do that is because I have a community, a Discord. We have a couple hundred people, almost 450 people who are in it. I would say about maybe 20 of them participate and provide content and consume information and stuff. Like everybody's consuming information, but very few people actually say hello, share links and stuff like that, which is fine. But I would say like it's a very easy way for you to show up and like stand out. I would say there's also communities like Code Newbies as well, same deal. Like very few people participate, but it's a very large community. So like find community through Twitter. I mentioned earlier, like whether you're doing DevOps, whether you're trying to do Go, Python, Google top whatever language, whatever framework engineers on Twitter, and create a Twitter account. If you're not doing that, you're missing out.
Right.
But 2, follow everybody that's in that field that is a thought leader or making a difference or whatever is recommended. And then from there, like start pruning. Like if you don't like what someone else is saying, or this is not a person that you want to follow, like don't follow them, but follow the people they're following. And then at that point, join their conversation. So very few people provide positive feedback on content, like on your tweet, on your blog posts, on this YouTube account. Like if you're not in the comments saying, hey, I love this part, I love that part, then you're missing an opportunity to show your face and like get free mentorship. Like I imagine if you went to every one of these YouTube videos and you're like, here's the thing I got from this. Here's the thing I got from that. Here's the thing I got from this. Like would probably notice like every single time somebody like said something, and like if you see their avatar, you're like, oh wow, this person's showing up. Like maybe I can help them out because they're helping me out feel good about liking and commenting on my stuff. And that's exactly what it is. Like the creator of Python, Guido van Rossum. Like if you were following him on Twitter and you're like, hey Guido, great blog post. There's an engineer who's on core team on Python, Mariana Wojaya. I interviewed her on my other podcast, which is the GitHub Review podcast. And she talked about how she went to a conference and she sat in the front row because, she just wanted to get to know people. And Guido was talking about they need more diversity. They need more people contributing to Python. And he's like, if anybody wants to, want some help, like just reach out to me. And she's like, oh, cool. So she reached out to him and she found out later that no one else reached out.
Wow.
The guy who created Python, like sitting there just telling you, hey, we want more people, and no one's reaching out. So she reached out. She's now core team. He was trained. She got the steps of like how to maintain the project, how to contribute just by being in the room. And I think you don't have to be in the room. Like you could be on Twitter and see that tweet and be like, hey, I want free mentorship. I would love to chat with the person who created this thing. And like you see it with Dan Abramoff and like React. Like Dan's not handing out free mentorship and one-on-one pairing with anybody, but he's constantly tweeting about the project and asking questions. They created a React working group, which anybody can comment and provide feedback to, but very few people do. And the people that do, it's the same people you see over and over and over and over again.
Right.
The same thing with conferences, the same thing with meetups. You see the same speakers over and over and over again, because those are the people who are like, oh, I figured out how to play the game. And like, it is a game. Like, if you just happen to know the right people, like, as you mentioned earlier, I've not submitted a resume to any job I've got. I've submitted resumes, to be very clear. I've not gotten those jobs.
Right.
The ones that I've gotten the jobs from are the people who championed me. They were basically my cheerleader. They basically gave me the introduction into the next thing. And it's because I showed up in the room, because I know very few people will speak at a meetup. Very few people will come on this podcast, or I don't know, this podcast or YouTube interview and come chat with you, because not everybody wants to put themselves out there because of imposter syndrome, because of limitations that maybe they have physically, mentally. That's very valid, but you don't have to do a YouTube series. You can write a blog post. Yeah. You don't have to write a blog post. You can go show up on a podcast. You don't have to show up on a podcast. You can contribute code. You don't have to contribute code. You can write documentation. Like, don't let the excuses limit you. Don't let your own limitations limit you. So like, if speaking is not your thing, write the code, write the documentation. Do something that you can provide value, and find out what that value could be by just showing up and being in a space.
bdougie, this interview has been loaded with jewels. I gotta have you back on, because I would love to talk to you about developer advocacy, content creation, and branding. I think a lot of what you talked about indirectly explain on how you built your brand. So
yeah,
through showing up, through creating blog posts, through commenting on Twitter, through, just networking, all of these different pieces is what helped you not only get to where you are, but to establish who you are, you know what I mean, in this industry. And yeah, I would love to have a conversation around that. So if you're interested, I want to have you back, bro.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. I love talking about this, but also I love talking about that, because I feel like developer advocacy is one of the like hidden secrets when it comes to the developer space.
Yep.
I feel like we're only scratching the surface on this. I think more people are being hired into this role. Mm-hmm. But like, if I could do a role where I can have a public persona, a brand, ship a bunch of side projects, ship a bunch of paid side projects too as well, which I mentioned I don't ship iOS apps, but I've actually have some applications that have earned me money.
Nice.
Not a lot of money, but just recognition, getting me deals through my very small YouTube channel. Like it's all about having that persona and that brand. Mm-hmm. But also I want to say you do want to have something to back it up with. So like, write code, learn, show up in a community. Folks can they can see through the fluff very quickly. So definitely don't go full advocate with nothing to show for it. Like, learn, read books, join community, subscribe, like everything.
For sure. Thank you. I'm going to have bdougie's information in the description of this video. We're going to have him back on. Thank everybody for viewing. Hey, bdougie, you want to take us out today?
Yeah. Y'all stay saucy, and see you in the next one.
Peace.